So what I wanted to do today was build on a LinkedIn post that I made a few days ago, just around how do we identify what business units within a group structure an invoice is being sent to. I often have customers come to me and say, we want to do some invoice automation, but we've got quite a complex group structure and invoices come into one central location. And how do we know which invoices are for which part of the group? Typically I see this happen for a number of different reasons, kind of two or three different reasons. One is that often the customers that are coming to me have grown through acquisition, so they've bought different businesses with different brands that do broadly similar things, and they've expanded that way. And they'll either want to keep that branding and keep the kind of physical bricks and mortar locations that come with that branding, but probably still want to move to having a shared finance function, or they'll want to incorporate everything a bit more closely and maybe kind of rebrand the acquisitions to something more closely in line with their own kind of naming and those sorts of things. And both of those approaches create some challenge around how do we make sure that when the invoice arrives in the mailbox, we know who to process it for. And that can be important because there might be different people involved with processing invoices. It might be that the company wants to make sure that suppliers are using the correct business units and are sending them to the correct locations. And most likely as well, there's some reason for the group structure in terms of there'll be a separate company within the finance package that the invoices that need to be posted to as well. The other thing that I see fairly regularly is companies that have expanded quickly or expanded over time, and they do a number of different things within their organization. Maybe they've got speciality in one area and speciality in another area, and they're starting to split the company up into different groups, usually for financial reporting. So again, usually they've had one company within their finance package, but now it makes sense to split that out into different entities for reporting or whatever it might be. And so they're starting to create some group structure, and therefore they need their workflows and their processes and their intelligent document processing to follow that group structure as well. So we're going to look at those different scenarios. What can we do when an invoice has a business unit name and a physical location, which is going to be unique to that particular invoice? So using business unit data and intelligent document processing to assign that invoice to a specific business unit. If that can't work because each business unit isn't very unique, there isn't many differences in the names, and all the locations are the same because the finance team's based in the same location, and that's the way that the company's decided to do it, is to bring everything under that one group structure. What can we do then? And often the answer to that sort of scenario is backfilling from the order number. So looking at the document, seeing the order number, deciding which business unit that order number refers to, and backfilling from that information. And then finally, another technique that we use sometimes is to say, well, let's separate the input channels out. So often invoice arriving via email, let's have a very specific email address for business unit 1, for business unit 2, for business unit 3, and really split the input channels so that right at the very beginning of the process we know that we're capturing invoices for a specific business unit by the specific email address that's used. So those are the three techniques we're going to have a look at today. I'm just going to load my demo system and we'll have a little bit more of an in-depth look. First thing, what we're going to be doing today is kind of looking at this specifically in relation to a intelligent document processing tool called Abbyy Flexicapture, which is what we've got in front of us here. Part of my tool set that I regularly use and recommend when we're looking at capturing information from documents. So if we're doing accounts payable projects and we need to capture information from invoices, then we're likely to be using Abbyy Flexicapture. If we're doing sales order processing projects and we're collecting information from orders, we're likely to be using Flexicapture. So very good at collecting information from semi-structured documents, or even structured or unstructured documents, but that's a video for another time. So the first approach to identifying who the invoice is being sent to is by using the address. So here you can see on this particular invoice, this supplier is telling us very specifically that they're delivering these goods to a company called Acme Company at Acme Street, Leeds, LS21. And so that's very well defined on the page. If I have a look in the settings for this particular capture project, you'll see that I have a data set. So a lot of what we do when it comes to automation is, and certainly with document processing, is looking on the page and determining what's being told to us by using reference data, master data, data sets. So you can see here, there's more videos around vendors and purchase orders and order item lines coming in further on later on down the line. But business units is the first one that we're going to concentrate on. So what we've done is this fictional company, this Abbyy company, it's got a group structure. So we can see here when we have a look at the business units that are set up in relation to this project, we've got one kind of core business unit here, Abbyy company, and then you can see we've got subsidiary A, B, and C, all based at different locations, so different street level addressing, different postcodes, different cities. So the first way that most intelligent document processing products should allow you to identify who the invoice is being sent to is by looking on the page and matching information we find on the page, so in this deliver to box, back to information we hold about our group structure and our business units. So you can see one-to-one relationship between what's on the document, what the supplier is telling us, and our first business unit. This is our business unit's name. Critically, usually with processing these documents further on downstream, is the business unit ID. So we're going to use that usually to decide which company within the finance system to post this invoice to, for instance. So it doesn't have to be an exact match. So you can see here we've got Abbyy Company on the document. It's set up as Abbyy Company Limited in the background. Flexicapture at least does some normalization and understands there's going to be some slight differences, but it's going to score what it sees on the page and decide which business unit is most appropriate for it to use. So that's how I've got this set up. So if I just now hit on testing, so you'll see just before we do that, we'll just fit this to width, or at least fit it to height maybe. So you can see this is a fictional invoice for a supplier called Beach Packaging, sending the invoice to Abbyy Company for an order that Abbyy Company's placed for some packaging. Abbyy Company's got this group structure, those three subsidiaries. When this invoice arrives in a shared mailbox, so all the invoices coming into one central location, but addressed separately to each of the business units, we can see how this would work. So this particular tool just allows us to test our current configuration just by hitting the testing menu there and just clicking on test. It will then go through and apply all of the inbuilt logic for recognizing information off the page itself, and then also all of the tweaks and changes and configuration that we've done specific to this project, including the fact that we've got that data set with those four different parts of the group company, the core company, and the three subsidiaries. So you can see now screen's refreshed. Got a copy of the document on the right hand side, so the invoice in this case, copy of the information that's been pulled from it on the left hand side. And one of the first bits of information I can see is at the top here. It says business unit. So when I drop that down, you can see it has selected the Abbyy Company business unit, ID number 21. And it's done that in this case. When I click onto the name field, you can see the corresponding information on the page. So I have those four business units set up. It looked on the page, it found Abbyy Company, it's related that back to the business unit we had set up that was named Abbyy Company. Likewise, Abbyy Street, postcode there, city level addressing. So obviously, if this invoice was addressed to subsidiary A at a different location with a different postcode, then it's going to find that information and it's going to apply the ID that's relevant to that subsidiary. So that's the first way of dealing with it, master data around business units. The second most common way of dealing with it is actually through a slightly different data set. And this can be particularly useful where invoices are coming in and actually, because they're being sent to a shared finance location, the suppliers are using the same address on each of the invoices for each of the different business units. There's very little variation on the page in terms of who that invoice is addressed to. There might be just the change of name, and that's usually not enough to rely on. So one of the things that we can do is use a different data set. So in this time, we've got purchase invoices here. When I click on that data set, you can see we've set up some business unit IDs against orders this time. So imagine purchasing team placing orders for different suppliers within the group structure, and for different business units. When they place an order, they'll be placing that order against that business unit. So that's the next thing that we can do to address this challenge, is that if we know the PO number that's on the invoice, we can relate that back to a specific business unit. Which PO was this set up for in terms of a business unit, and return that once we've found that order number, return that business unit ID. So same sort of process to test this idea of pulling back the business unit from the order number as we did previously. So I'm going to click on the testing menu and the run test. It'll pop up straight away without having to go through recognizing the page, because I haven't changed any settings. But what you'll see this time is, rather than looking at the business unit section of the form at the top here, I'm going to look at the purchase order section of the form. And when I click into the order number, you'll see on the form where it's found it from the invoice. So over here, we've got the order number that appears on the invoice. Now, this is using a data set of the order numbers and looking on the page and saying, for the supplier that we've identified, can we see any outstanding order numbers on this document, one or more of? So consolidated invoices, invoices for multiple orders, not a problem. We can look for multiple order numbers. In this case, it's a one-to-one relationship. There's one invoice, there's one order. And we can see it's found that order number off the page, and critically, then we've done a lookup and said, okay, for that order number, which business unit was this order placed upon? So the purchasing team has raised the order, they've applied the business unit to that order, we've recognized it from the invoice using intelligent document processing, and we've returned that business unit so that we can use that business unit then to make decisions later on down the workflow. So the final way of identifying which business unit an invoice is for is using input channels. So what I mean by this is specific email addresses for each of the business units. So when the purchasing team is raising orders and sending them out to the suppliers, they need to dictate which email address the supplier uses to communicate on from there in the future. You can still have the same centralized finance team looking after all the different invoices, but invoices are going to come into separate mailboxes. You can do some kind of management of those mailboxes so that actually they fed into one distribution group or something along those lines to make things simple. But in essence, we're going to have 4 different email addresses. So using this intelligent document processing tool, Flexicapture for invoices, we can set up 4 image import profiles, which is what you can see on screen. So one for the core company, one for each of the subsidiaries. Each one of those image import profiles is going to point at the separate mailbox, and then we can just specify in the settings which business unit each of those image import profiles is going to use. Nice and simple way of doing things. Keeps it kind of separate and clear up front. And it does the identification of the business unit without having to use anything that's actually on the document. So if you have got invoices that aren't going to have a supporting order number, for instance, this could be one way of dealing with that issue. Okay, so today we looked at 3 different ways of identifying the business unit. The first one using the address the invoice was sent to and a business unit data set. The second one being backfilling from the order number, so purchasing team raises order with supplier, they note against the order which business unit it's for, and when we recognize the order number off the page using intelligent document processing, we backtrack to the business unit. And the third one, using import channels. So 3 different email addresses. Purchasing team is issuing those email addresses alongside the orders and expecting the suppliers to then communicate back on those email addresses, and we can associate each individual email address to a business unit. If anyone else has any other techniques to use to identify business units from invoices, I'd be interested to hear about them. And if you like anything that you've heard today and you want to talk to me further, then you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to have a conversation. Many thanks.